It's that time of year once again, a time I absolutely love. Every year in the month of October we all celebrate Halloween. Dressing up as your favourite ghoul, playing trick or treat, bombing for apples at your yearly Monster Mash party, and even watching your favourite horror movies. Movies that you probably watch all year round, but somehow they feel even more spooky watching them on All Hallows Eve. And even though Halloween promotes ghosts, zombies, and unbelievable terror, we have also succeeded at making it a fun, colourful, really enjoyable part of the year that most find more delightful than Christmas. But where did Halloween originate? Before the church and the candy companies exploited what its true meaning actually is. Well, today, we're going to look into it. We're going to step back in time and find out the origin of Halloween. It is believed that what we now know as Halloween began as a pre-Christian holiday celebrated by ancient Celts way back in medieval Ireland, and this was called Samhain, which translated means summer's end. This represented the start of the Celtic New Year, which began on the 1st of November, and so on the 31st of October, on the eve of the New Year, the celebrations began. Samhain was the most important of 4 fire festivals held throughout the year by the Celts. It was a time to gather the very important harvests and prepare for a very harsh winter that could literally mean life or death. Food was very scarce, and livestock did not always make it through the very cold months. It was literally a festival to say goodbye to the light and welcome in the dark. But it was also a time to allow the spirits of dead loved ones to pass over to the other side. Once the harvest was collected, Druid priests would light a large bonfire and the celebrations would begin. This included praying to the gods as well as sacrificing a few animals here and there for good measure. And it was also believed that the veil between our world and the spirit world was at its thinnest, and the dead could walk among the living and vice versa. And the villagers also dressed themselves up as monsters by skinning animals and wearing their pelts. This was a way to trick the spirits, and it is believed that this is where the act of dressing up as a monster at Halloween originated. At some point during the festivities, the villagers would then take a flame from the bonfire and take it back to their homes and light the hearth, bringing in good fortune. And as time went on, the bonfires became more and more personal and were lit closer to home to protect families from evil spirits. And it wasn't long before other familiar practices started to pop up, like the introduction of the jack-o'-lantern, which wasn't initially a pumpkin but a turnip, which came from an old Irish folklore tale named Stingy Jack, which I have covered on Bizarre Tales in the past. In a nutshell, the story revolves around a fellow named Jack who managed to trick the devil on numerous occasions after the devil wanted his soul. Jack tricked the devil into never taking his soul, and upon his death he was refused entrance into heaven, and so he went back to the devil and asked for entrance into hell, but the devil would not let him into hell. And so he was left to wander the cold dark nights holding a carved out turnip that was alight with burning hot embers from the fire pits of hell. And so people started to introduce the carved out turnips into the festivities, placing them on doorways and windowsills to scare away evil spirits or Jack himself. It was sometime later that it was changed to pumpkins when the tradition crossed over the sea to America, where turnips were not grown but pumpkins were, and that is where the use of pumpkins eventually came into it. Eventually Christianity would make its way into Ireland, and instead of totally wiping out Celtic beliefs and traditions, the church simply tried to dilute it, to take many of the Celtic traditions and incorporate it into Christianity. And because of this, it made it so much easier to convert the pagans. The Christian church also went about changing key points on the Celtic calendar and kind of took over certain pagan rituals. And eventually this happened to Samhain, when the church named the 1st of November All Saints' Day, which was an attempt to stamp out Samhain on the 31st of October. Eventually All Saints' Day would become All Hallows' Day and started to become known as All Hallows' Evening, which changed at some point to All Hallows' Even, and eventually to what we all know it as today, Halloween. The church also made November the 2nd All Souls' Day, which was a day to honour the dead and pray for lost relatives and loved ones and help any spirits that may become trapped in purgatory since they passed away. And it is believed that all 3 of these holidays somehow influenced each other and merged together, and Halloween became what it is today. And there is another tradition that came from All Souls' Day that could be connected with what Trick or Treat would eventually become much later on. You see, way back then, the poor would go around knocking on the doors of the wealthy begging for soul cakes. A soul cake was a small pastry treat filled with sweet raisins, and in exchange, the poor beggars would then pray for the souls of their loved ones who may have passed over in the last year. This changed slightly over the years to singing a song or reciting a poem or doing some kind of performance for the householder, and in return, they would expect a treat of some sort be handed over. A treat for a service rather than a treat instead of a trick. But I'm sure you can see the similarities. And it was not long before the holiday came to America, brought by Irish immigrants escaping the Great Potato Famine of the 1840s. And it was actually at this point that the jack-o'-lanterns were introduced to America, like I said before. But it wasn't only the introduction of jack-o'-lanterns. Also, the introduction of rowdy tricksters were en masse running around pranking people quickly became a problem, which actually caused so much trouble with the locals that bribes were introduced to stop the tricksters from striking. And so, sugary treats were introduced, but initially this was short-lived as the Second World War started, which resulted in a sugar shortage. But directly after the war ended and sugar was back on the menu, not to mention the baby boom that followed, which would mean eventually more children running around the streets causing mayhem, it wasn't long before the tradition of trick or treat was promptly resumed. And it wasn't long before the candy companies caught wind of this and quickly started advertisement campaigns that were aimed purely at Halloween, cementing the tradition of trick or treat into popular culture until this very day. And eventually Halloween became what we know it as today, a night of fun, games and mischief, which was all born from the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain, when the veil was thin and the dead walked the earth once again. And maybe, just maybe, they still do. And so, until we meet again, have a very, very spooky Halloween. See you next time. Bye bye.